Hey, man. Welcome back.
Welcome back, James. Nice to see you again.
I had a question for you today. I've been dealing with a lot of the hiring that I do is with earlier stage startups, looking for software engineers, generally sort of type of product engineer. Um, I had a client that I've known for a while. I've placed some people there, and I had a candidate who on paper, and from the my conversations with them prior, I thought was going to be a sure thing. And then after a couple of technical interviews, he got knocked back, and I was shocked, and so was he. To be frank, they were very interested in the role. I do get this from time to time, but I'm curious, like how often in your experience, did you have someone that on paper looked like a really great candidate and was going to be, very likely that that person was going to go through a process and hire, or at least make an offer, but they turned out to be, not at all what you thought?
Hmm. I've got it. I'm kind of on the other side of the table, right? So I've been the hiring manager as opposed to the employee in this sense. So the first thing I'd say was we actually had this both ways. So we had people that looked great on paper, and ended up not fitting at all. And then we also had some people who didn't look that great on paper. It was a bit so, but ended up you took a bit of a risk on them, and they ended up really flourishing, and becoming fantastic. So yeah, yes, it does happen. Now, what can you do about it? I guess is the question. I don't know that there's an easy answer here. I don't think there's a one size fits all answer. So rather than try and give advice, pap advice about you should do this, you should do that, I can tell you some of the things that we did and I have done in the past that maybe help here, and can help you to get through it. But what I will say before I do that is that you're going to make mistakes here. It's impossible to be right 100% of the time. You will make mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes are
Yeah.
good in the sense that you find someone who you weren't sure about and they turn out to be great, right? So that's a fantastic mistake to make. The other times, they may have had higher expectations for someone and they were able to deliver, and you need to part ways, and that's not so great. But the worst thing is when you make a mistake and you don't fix it. Right,
Yep.
that's
Yep.
the worst. That's the worst thing, and that can be toxic for the team and actually for the person as well. I think some of the I've heard more than one person say this, that they got themselves into a terrible position in a job and a decision was made for them, and it was the best thing that ever happened,
Mm, mm.
right? Because it really just shunted their career.
So, how do you avoid? Well, two things. There's avoiding hiring someone that looks great or did really well in an interview process and turns out not to be good. Or how do
Yeah.
you avoid not hiring the person that you should have hired? Like, what do you think companies can do to avoid
Well,
mishiring or missing out?
I think the way you're framing it is that there's a false positive and a false negative, right? So
Yeah.
hiring someone you shouldn't or not hiring someone you should have, right? And okay, so the first thing is they have different consequences. So in a market like we have now, where it's pretty much a buyer's market, not hiring someone you should have is probably not as big an impact as hiring someone you shouldn't have, right? So the false the false positive is probably worse than the false negative at the moment. In different
Yeah.
markets, which we've both been in, the last 10 years, we've had a different version of this market where it's a seller's market, missing the false positive versus false negative angle is probably the other way around. All right. So what can you do? I think the first thing you have to do is you need to be really clear about what question you're asking. Like, what are you hiring for?
Hmm.
Okay. And so I see this a lot. Some
So have
businesses
a
are
plan.
actually
Have a good plan.
Indeed, but
Yep.
specifically, you need to know what question you're asking. Now, a lot of businesses go and hire like crazy 10x, to the extent that these people exist, these 10x or 100x programmers for their business model disruption startup. And so the problem they're solving is, how can we take technology and disrupt this business domain? All right. We're not inventing new technology there. And so the last thing you need is a 10x programmer to come in and seduce the non-techs in the room with all this fancy technology ideas, right? And two things will happen. They'll build a bunch of stuff you don't need, and then they'll get bored. Okay. So that's a case of, if you were building some deep tech, hard tech thing, and you needed to really sort of crack the universe a bit, they're exactly the right kind of person to hire, right? Because you are sort of really pushing the boundary of technology. So you need to know that You need to know what you're doing. And I think a lot of times people don't, they just think tech's just tech, right? And they don't really make that distinction. So just to be clear, to make that distinction clear, there's a kind of hard tech, deep tech thing where you're solving technical problems. You're doing things with tech that maybe haven't been done before. And then there's a business model disruption kind of startup where you're taking tech that exists and you're deploying that to disrupt some business domain somehow.
Yep.
Okay. And I would argue that this version, the business model disruption, you want to try and keep the tech as simple as possible. If you are fortunate enough to succeed and you get scale, you'll get a whole bunch of challenging problems to solve that come with that scale. But in the first instance, you want to probably try and keep the tech as simple as possible. In contrast, if you're trying to solve a genuinely deep tech problem, you really do need the hardcore engineers, and you need to maybe go and do some science as opposed to engineering. And so that's a very different problem. So that's the first thing. All right. The second thing I would say is if you're not technical, and you see this a lot with startups, particularly of this kind, you've got someone who's not technical trying to disrupt a business domain using technology, you need to get some help. You need to have someone who can help you hire those first technical people. Now, you either do the sensible thing and get a technical co-founder, or you have some advisors somewhere who can help you hire those early stage employees. Okay. And so on the technical side, the deep tech side, if you think you're starting a deep tech business and you don't have a CTO as a founder, heavily invested in it, or a scientist of some kind, I think that lacks credibility, right? So I'm going to just sort of discount that option as sensible.
So as a candidate, that would be a bit of a red flag, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're like a deeply technical person and you're attracted to the idea of a startup that's doing something deeply technical and they don't have technical co-founder, that to me is a really massive red flag. Right, massive red flag. You see it all the time.
Yeah.
You see these ads, they come up on LinkedIn everywhere. We're going to disrupt this. We're going to do this with AI. As they're looking for a founding engineer, or there's no technical leadership in the business at all. It's like, really, what do you think you're doing if you don't have technical leadership in the business at the beginning? Seems unusual.
So the flip side of that, I guess, is if you want to join a deep tech, so you're looking for someone that's really technical, that's done some of that stuff before, or maybe it's not as important if it's something that's just more of a disruption technology.
100%. Yeah.
So you don't have to have that technical person. It's going to depend on the type of company that you're looking to join.
Yeah, totally. And I think this works both ways. This works both for employer and employee. If you're an employee and you're deeply technical, you need to be a bit savvy about what it is the business is doing. And like I said at the top, what question are we answering? And that's a question for both the potential hire, and the potential hirer, right? And if either one is uncertain about what's going on, you'll get conflict, you'll get misalignment. Okay, that's where the problems come from. So that's the first thing. Know what question you're answering, and at least except we talked about here, there's at least two. There's probably a few other dimensions that you might think about, but they're the two obvious ones that are clearly orthogonal. The next thing you do is, so at that point, you kind of have to assume that technical competence is table stakes, right? So either the technical co-founder in the deep tech side of things is able to evaluate a candidate to the extent that their technical skills are up to scratch, or if it's a non-technical founder, they've got someone in their advisor network or they're someone they trust who can do that technical evaluation. Okay, and then you move to values, right? At that point, you're moving to values, and this is super important. It doesn't matter whether you're this way or that way. I think you really have to hire at early stage. You have to hire on values, and if you have shared values, you can solve a lot of problems. Once you've got shared values, and also if you don't have shared values, this is the source of a lot of tension. And what's values, right? And the question, this comes up a lot. What's a value? A value is something that you go to in a time of crisis, right? It's a decision rubric that informs the way you make decisions in time of crisis when you're under pressure. That's what a value is in this context, right? The context of business. So if I'm under pressure and I'm stressed and whatnot, how am I going to behave? Like, what's my go-to operating model? Now, it's a little bit different to when we talk about my values as a human and so on. I'm talking about my values as the professional context. And so, as both a potential hire and a hiring manager, I would argue that you need to be pretty well aware and intentional is the word I use, intentional about your values. Here's what I believe. When I'm under pressure, this is how I'm going to behave. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. And then shared values are just a goal, like it's a superpower for collaboration. right? You can literally have a stand-up screaming match with someone, not that I'm recommending doing that, right? And if you've got shared values, the pair of you in that conversation will go, you know what, we need to just route around this problem and have a conversation about it. Because we've got shared values, that's a lot easier.
That's interesting. And what about culture? Does people probably have a different perspective of what culture is, but does culture like intersect in your mind with values, or is culture something completely separate that you test
That's a good
for
question.
or look, or not test for, but consider?
Yeah, yeah. So okay, so I have this, you know me, right? I've got a lot of these little phrases I throw around. So with culture, I think culture is tricky because there's a lot of what I call, well, sorry, what people call fit in. Will this person fit into the culture? Okay, and I tried to reframe that from fit in to fit out too. All right, and I'll explain what I mean. Right, so with fit
Or
in,
there's
the idea.
there's fit with the culture, or there's also add to the culture is how I would
Yeah,
probably
so same
describe
thing.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, we're saying the same thing. Yeah, so fit in is, will this person fit in? So we've got this kind of circle, and we
Yeah.
all have our roles within this circle, and will this person fill one of those holes, right? But the way I try to look at it, it's hard, but I try to look at it is actually what I'm more interested in is where do we want to be, and what is the kind of landscape look like where we're going, and how can this person get us to that future, fit out to that future view of what the culture is, right? And it's a simple
Absolutely.
idea, right? This is not neuroscience, or not, this is a very simple idea. It's just, rather than asking yourself, is this person going to fit in? Because that's constraining, and you end up sort of normalizing to the
Yeah.
average of
Yeah.
what you've got. It's okay. Where do I want to go, and what does it look like when we go there? And can this person fit out to that?
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Makes sense.
And the other thing I'd say about culture is, I think the one thing I would encourage anyone who's starting a business is have a think about whether you want a strong culture or a weak culture, because they're not good or bad. Okay, they're different. So strong cultures have really obvious norms that people conform to and behave within, and so they're great for discipline and focus and so on. Weak cultures don't have that, and so they tend to allow a bit more. They can be more innovative, or a bit more open-ended, or a bit more flexible. But the downside of a weak culture is decision making is harder.
Yeah.
So strong culture, decision making is really easy because the boss said so, but innovation is more difficult because people don't feel like they can run outside the rails. So again, the word here, the key word with culture is and values actually, is intentionality. Be intentional about it. Sit down and actually write down what you
Yeah.
think your values are. Write down some brief, and you don't have to go into all sorts of crazy consultants and PowerPoint slides and stuff. It's a one pager, right? This is actually a values statement is not even a one pager. It's like 5 bullet points.
Yeah.
And a culture is, we do this instead of that. We favor this over that, or we believe this, and we accept this and we reject that. These kinds of things. And the
Okay.
CEO, the CTO, like the CTO within the engineering organization, the CEO in the organization as a whole, that's their job to be crafting those kinds of things.
So what I think a lot of people could take away from this is really, if you're going to start hiring, have a plan and be very intentional about how you go about that plan. I feel like there's a lot of stuff we could go into. We did want to keep this short, so I think we can park that there. But if anyone is listening and still listening,
If anyone's
and
still
is
listening,
anyone's there and wants to know, has a question about, it doesn't have to be about hiring, but something that they thought about today, or something they want answered, then drop us an email, or all the details will be in the show notes, and we can try and answer it over the coming weeks.
yeah, I think that's a good idea. We will hope to do a AMA sort of episode at some point where we pull all the questions and spend some time talking through them.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Thank you for your wisdom there, Matt. Appreciate that, and we will see everyone next time.
Wrap. Thanks, James.
Thanks, Matt. Bye.